Welcome, friends and listeners, to the Regeneration podcast, also the Regeneration YouTube. Maybe every fourth episode, Michael, you'll hear me try to direct some people who might think we're only on YouTube to the ability to listen to us on audio. And if people have only heard of us on audio, I think it's like a mutually exclusive subset. They all have their own demographics. And if you look at the numbers, the people who on the podcast version are drawn to certain episodes that are huge there, but not on YouTube, much lower. There's things I could say about that, but I'm not so sure I understand them yet. But Michael, something I hate is the use of wind chill and the feels like temperature.
Yeah.
So last night, are you feeling this heat in the Midwest? Okay. Yeah. So it's not here. We're like 60s, super temperate, no humidity.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, it was this morning when I got up to go to school, it was 62 and, not very humid. But when I came home, and now it's almost 90 and very humid.
Yeah, I think we're 68 or something. But the last night on the
Thank you,
news,
DARPA. That's right.
Last night on the evening news, it's the second time I've seen it. And it wasn't my local one. It was the national news. And I think it was ABC. I don't normally watch the news, but they were talking about this major heat wave in the Midwest is for real. But they flashed temperatures. And at the last minute, they mentioned that it's the feels like temperature, right? Which is some cockamamie equation that, involves humidity. And again, the wind chill is the same thing. If you want to use those weird things, because again, like people have heard me, 33 degrees with 50-mile-per-hour winds, which would have a wind chill of like 27, it still doesn't freeze water. So if you want to give me the wind chill and the actual temperature and the feels like, fine. But it was the lead news story, and they broadcast this map, and there was these really high temperatures, but it was the feels like temperature. Michael Martin, do you have any problem with that like I do, or are you pretty cool with that?
Yes, because it's propaganda to spread fear. Okay. That's all it is.
Well, mic drop.
I've been talking about this to students all day.
Yeah.
I'm ramped up, and I had 3 cups of coffee, so I'm ready to roll here.
All right. So what the world is doing is downloading fear into young people.
Our
guest today might have something to say about that. Our guest today, Wilhelm and Sally Hojer, right?
That's right.
Okay, good. And they've listened to the podcast. They were traveling through my area of upstate New York a few weeks ago. They were at a Catholic worker house in south of me. The address, the town is seen in the Diocese of Rochester, but where you were staying is technically in the Diocese of Buffalo. So I was wondering how there was a Catholic worker house that I'd never heard of. And then they drove up around 35 minutes north, and they spent an afternoon with me and my son Aiden, who's been on the podcast, and our dog. And Amy was Amy in and out, or did she not even meet you guys?
We met her.
Okay.
Briefly.
Oh, then she had to go do something with flowers for my daughter's wedding or something, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Wilhelm and Sally, welcome to the Regeneration podcast. I wonder if you could, I think the goal of today is I'm describing you. There's that country song, Two Sparrows in a Hurricane, Trying to Find Their Way. I describe you too when we talked. You're both very interesting. Your journey is an interesting one. The same weekend you're living at a Catholic worker house where people, you can tell the story there. But like some of the owners were, just running down anything associated with conservative Catholicism. But then Wilhelm and Sally, they go up to the Latin Mass in Rochester. And I learned a lot about the Latin Mass. Sally, I remember when you told me that the coffee conversation is often like things like, are you in tradition? Did you know that phrase, Michael?
No.
That means like, do you go to Latin Mass? Are you in tradition? Is that right, Sally?
Yeah, like when did
it's great.
Tradition, or how long have you been in tradition?
I like those things. I don't mean to criticize them at all. But So welcome, Wilhelm and Sally. One of you, tell us a little bit of your story as you see it. In one sense, kind of briefly, how you met, this whole idea of what, you're very driven by your faith, and tell us where you are now, and then we'll interject with questions and things. But start going.
Sure. Sally and we met in Rome, and in 2015, we met on the streets where I was living. I was living between St. Peter's Church and the Piazza Navona, in that neighborhood right there. I was working for the Vatican. So for 7 years, I was working for the Vatican news service on the news desk there.
So what's their logo? Like an article you would have written at that time comes out at like the Catholic News Agency in the US. Okay.
in the US. And yeah, so they have most of the languages of the world. And I was working in the Scandinavian section, but also doing a few things for the English section.
You've also written for
Uh,
the Epoch Times, and people
yeah,
can
Epoch
Google your name.
Times and some, in some Catholic Scandinavian newspapers, and done a few writing things,
Very cool.
some poetry, some plays, things like that as well. But we met in December 2015, and Sally had been in Rome for 3 days. So I met her on the third day of her descent into Rome. And her first question to me was, "Are you happy?" And I said, "Well, I have enough. I know enough about sorrow and joy to know the difference. So I'm not happy yet, but I know it's out there." And then we just started talking about everything, our spiritual journeys and how they began, in a very similar path, but also very different. But we talked about everything between the Earth and the Moon, and we're still talking. And eventually we got married in 2016 in Maine. And we've been trying
Congratulations.
to, yeah, thank you. And then we've been trying to forge together a Christian life. We got married, and then our honeymoon, we have no money. Where do you go if you have no money on honeymoon? Well, we went on pilgrimage through Spain. So we went to Santiago, and
Awesome.
we actually had a Bible in a year with us, and we felt very close to the Jewish people. We're always complaining why they left Egypt, because our first house was a tent, and it was very uncomfortable sometimes. So, but yeah, we've just been forging ahead as trying to create our Christian Catholic life together, and trying to speak with one voice together, and trying to understand the world as it is, and trying to live Christian lives, and then also starting a family and what that means. And well, there's a lot of things there, but maybe Sally wants to say something.
Yeah, and Sally, you're something of a revert, convert. Describe again. Yeah.
Yeah, a convert. It's hard to say exactly when my Catholic journey began, but definitely it was a big part of it was going to Rome. I had no real interest in going to Rome. I was raised in various Protestant denominations. So Rome for me was, in a Catholic sense, never something really on my radar as a place to pilgrimage to, as a place to go to. I mean, there was obviously, it was an ancient city and stuff, but it just wasn't a place that I really thought about going to too much. And then I had completed my first year of college. I was in Florida at Florida State,
And
and
your parents were pastors, right? Or
my grandfather was an Episcopal minister,
okay.
my dad's dad, and both of my parents grew up in the Episcopal Church. And then I'm the fourth of six kids, and so kind of in varying degrees for us, like we were raised in our younger years in the Episcopal Church and kind of going more charismatic. And then eventually, when I was like in middle school, we started going to an Assemblies of God church. And so
Michael,
kind
you've heard of the Vineyard movement? Is that something you're familiar with? It was
Nope.
like holy laughter coming out of it was a holy laughter movement coming out of a church near the Toronto airport. And then kind of the big person was called Nicky Gumbel. And then it became a big thing. What's the other word used for it? The Alpha Course. It developed the Alpha
oh
Course,
yeah,
which was an
yeah.
evangelical tool. That was a lot of great stuff. They used a lot of Chesterton. And so your parents that was their
Yeah, like
evangelical.
we had
spirit.
alpha meetings in my family growing up,
Yeah.
and they were very into, in their early years of marriage, I think it was really like, yeah, Chuck Smith, Calvary Chapel, that was like
Okay.
them as new parents and newly married and stuff. So yeah, so I kind of grew up between a very traditional Episcopal liturgy while my grandfather was still alive, and kind of going to his church when we were in the same area, and then kind of just exploring in other denominations too as we went along growing up. So I definitely didn't have, there weren't like conversations about the Catholic Church really in my family or anything. I didn't really have Catholic friends. So I didn't know anybody who was Catholic. I just kind of, if you'd asked me growing up what I thought about Catholicism, I feel like I would have just been like, well, we're not Catholic. Like, I just know that that's like what we're not. I didn't
Yeah.
really know too much beyond that. There wasn't like a lot of theological discussions going on about that, but it was more, yeah, just we're not Catholics. And so yeah, I had just finished my first year at Florida State University, and I knew that wasn't really like the place that I wanted to be. I didn't really have like this calling. I didn't have a career path I was looking to go down. So I just didn't want to go into debt and didn't want to just stay in college. So I was kind of sitting on my bed wondering what to do. And I wanted to travel, and I was looking in the Middle East. I had been studying Arabic at Florida State, and I thought that was really cool. So I was kind of thinking about going somewhere where they spoke Arabic so I could learn the language. And then it just kind of out of nowhere, I had I like had this feeling that I had to go to Rome. And it was very strange. I was just like, huh? Like to Rome? No. And part of me was like, that's like Western Europe. That's just boring. That's cliche. I want to go somewhere more exotic and interesting. And then it was about 8 months from that time where it just like stuck with me. And I was like kind of looking into ways to go to Rome. But the whole time it was also like, I don't really want to go there. Like, what is going on here? Until finally I had worked the summer and I saved up some money and I just bought like a one-way ticket to Rome because I thought, I guess I'll just go.
I
Get
like
it
the one-way
there.
ticket. That shows a lot about your personality.
Yeah, and I like brought everything in cash. Like I just was
Mhm.
like, I took everything out of my bank account that I had saved up in the summer in cash. I like put it in my purse with my passport. I'm like, I don't want any debit cards. I don't want any like way for people to send me money. I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna see what this whole Rome thing is about. And then I'll like go to the Middle East, or I'll like, I don't know, I'll
Wow.
just go from there. And I had enough, I guess, sense to pack like all my camping gear. Like I brought a lot of stuff with me. I brought like good camping gear, and so I was kind of set up from then. I didn't know anyway. So I met Wilhelm, as you said, 3 days later after I landed, and we became like really good friends right away. And but I was in Europe for 18 months that trip on that one-way
Okay.
ticket. I
And
wasn't
kind
gonna.
of through Wilhelm was your exposure to Catholicism and so forth.
Yes, so yeah, I mean
Okay.
we did go to, like when I got to Rome, because I was very like serious Protestant. Like I was a very like my faith was very serious to me. So I just remember being like, well, I know there's a lot of churches in Rome. Again, I wasn't thinking like Catholic or Protestant. I was just like, I know there's a lot of churches here. So maybe I can try and go to a different church every day. Like that's something I could do. That's something I could see. And so yeah, and so he actually did take me to my first Catholic mass. And it was really an interesting experience. And just yeah, so it was definitely through him. I mean, it took many years from that point. Like it took 8 years before I was confirmed in the church with a
Okay.
long
Now I
story.
want to. So Michael, see, I've talked to them, and there's a lot of interesting stuff. But one of the reasons I invited them on is that they're both very comfortable in their skin, And I think you not knowing their story so well, I would want you to kind of pipe in with questions because some of the things I don't think we talked about, like why didn't you go Orthodoxy, stuff like that. What occurs to you based on what you've heard so far, Michael? You've been around young people your whole lives.
Well, I'm thinking what's intriguing to me is this sense of adventure and the sense of a call. And so, but I want to see how did that sense of adventure and sense of a call, because if you're working for the Catholic News Service, that's pretty mainstream Catholicism right there, right?
Oh yeah.
How does that translate into being in tradition?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so I was working for the Vatican, which is very mainstream, the Vatican News Service, on their news desk. And during that first conversation that I had with Sally, both of us had been reading some years before, like Bhagavad Gita and some Eastern meditations, and we were kind of complaining together why we're so much happier
Oh,
in the
this was a
Eastern
highlight. This is so
tradition.
funny. Yeah, now
And
they
then,
talk about why were they once happy. It's very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
They're in tradition, but they're always talking about why were they once happy when they were doing their
yeah,
Zen meditation.
yeah, but yeah, and then it was, because Christianity gets you so upset sometimes, and especially on Sundays, and the rest of the week is usually good. Sundays usually makes you upset, and
Really
we
funny.
were trying to find something that glued us together, which is hard, So for all the talk of ecumenism, you're wondering where that is. Where is that glue that holds us together? We did come from different traditions, and that unity that's there. And also the the inclusive, the poetry that's supposed to be there, the imagination that's supposed to be there. Where did that go? You don't always feel it. You read about it as this place, but where is this place on the map? You can't find it. And so I think for our Catholic life together, we were going to these to the regular Novus Ordo masses, as so-called Novus Ordo masses, and then when we saw the Latin mass, there was a beauty there, and beauty's not everything, but it's something. Yeah. And we just really loved the beauty of it. But I think the important thing, and you learn that working for the Vatican, you can't be a Catholic and be naive. If you're naive, you're not going to last. And the same thing with the Latin mass communities. That being said, it's there's something to grapple with there. There is the beauty there. And honestly, it was the only place that I found that actually cared even about the liturgical year, which seemed to have been lost in the so-called Novus Ordo world. They really do try to follow that. So that's some of the things that attracted it.
So here's the thing for me. So I've been, one of my best friends is a tradie, and I have written at length in my books and blogs, etc., about the tragedy of the church year being divorced from the cosmic year, the agricultural year, but you still see it, and of all places, the Anglican Church still maintains a little bit of that. They still observe Lammas, and they still have more of a sense of the year, whereas the Novus Ordo Catholic cycle is like, what do you mean? What do you mean liturgical year A? Is this algebra? What the heck? Right? But the thing is, so I know a lot of people, and so we were involved. We were I grew up in the Novus Ordo Church, but my family, my children, and my wife and I have spent most of the last 25 years, except for the last 3, in the Byzantine Catholic Church, because the same thing that you were talking. The beauty attracted us, but also the smallness. Because Byzantine Catholic churches, I could learn everybody's name in a Byzantine Catholic church. I go to a big Roman Catholic church, it's what Dorothy Day called the long loneliness. You're like, okay, anybody want to talk about stuff? Nobody, right? But in a traditional or a SSPX or whatever church, they're also a little smaller, and you can know people. I'm guessing that's the case with you, which is very, for us when we were your age. Listen to the old guy. That was very attractive to us, right? Small is beautiful. But on the other hand, I also see in those realms, and I hear from them on a regular basis, for me, it begs a question of what does it mean to be Catholic? Because what you see a lot in the tradie movement is, and I'm not knocking this, going back even to, John the 23rd, they're almost sedevacantists, right? A lot of them, not everybody. And so for me, and this is a question that's lived in me, especially for the last 4 years, is then what is the Catholic Church? And and I don't know about you, but I have felt an extreme betrayal over the last 4 years by the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. Extreme. Which also, pushed me to seriously considering what is this thing we call the Catholic Church. And some people will say, well, it's the magisterium, and it's this, and what is it? So what is it for you guys?
I think it's also
question. That was awesome, Michael. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also to hold these opposites together. It's called the Roman Catholic Church for a reason. The small is beautiful. It's a city. That's also universal. But now it's become you don't see that anymore. But also because of the language barriers. That's one of the things that attracted us to the Latin. It's the Roman language that's very tied to one city, and yet it's universal. It's Roman because it's part of a city, but it's universal because you see Rome everywhere. But now it's the Italian Catholic Church, it's the American Catholic Church, the Swedish Catholic Church, and so on. It's become very Protestant that way. You don't know if you're in a church that glorifies the nation state or actually God. That's the problems of many of the Protestant churches and the Orthodox churches.
Well, absolutely.
And the Catholic Church is like that. So that's one of the things that is attractive with Latin. Or of course, I know that in the Eastern you have the liturgical Slavic, which ties into that as well. But that's what tied the Latin to our hearts, is that it at least it attempts to do that. And I think that it's always hard to define what a Catholic is and what Catholicism is. At best, if you've met a Catholic, you've only met one. It should be so, it should be so multifaceted. You should be able to see so many parts of it. It is Catholic and yet individual. It's Roman and Catholic. So to hold those two paradoxes together should be part of the heart of it.
Well, let me mess that up some more. So being Byzantine Catholic, which is not Roman Catholic, but still part of the Catholic Church, but which has, in some regards, very different theology. For instance, there's no theology of purgatory in the Byzantine Catholic Church.
Sucks for them. Just kidding.
Well,
I kind of I've got a soft spot for purgatory. Yeah, me too. Yeah.
You know, as speaking of Eastern religions, I always say the best book on purgatory is the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Yeah, right.
But so even all these things. So growing up in the Roman Church, practicing Byzantine Catholic for 25 years, it kind of for me loosened or gave me, we can call it, from one of the subtitles of my book, a kind of poetic metaphysics about it that was not tied even, that's not multicultural like those national churches. And you see Byzantine churches can be, they're less like that than the Orthodox. They can be basically, they're not even national churches, they're national social clubs or ethnic clubs,
right.
social clubs, right? But even there, you find young people like yourselves attracted to the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, right? They're attracted to the beauty and the smells and the bells and the aesthetics of it. And like you said, it's not everything, but it's something. And often the Novus Ordo liturgy for me is like infomercial for Jesus, right? So, but even though I've seen it done beautifully, but that's not my usual experience of it. It's not usually done beautifully. It's usually just done, But anyway, so this is a long way of asking. So what do you? I mean, there's a lot of uncertainties here, and even for myself, after the Pope declared that getting the vaccine was an act of love, it's like, all right, I'm done. I'm out. Can't do it anymore. And he was requiring employees of the Vatican to get vaccinated. I couldn't countenance that, which was heartbreaking for me and for my wife. Which also made me wonder and question within myself, what do I mean, and what is this meaning of this thing I still believe, I think I do, the Catholic Church? What does that mean? Because the Anglicans think they're part of the Catholic Church.
Well, yeah.
So do the Orthodox.
And some Catholics, I feel like, think they are too. I mean, as a convert, it sometimes is really interesting to me what Catholics, how they'll describe some Protestant, denominations. Like, well, they're basically Catholic, but they just, they don't have the Pope and they don't believe in the Eucharist, right? And I'm like, yeah, just minor, so a couple minor things. But no, I love the question, what is the Catholic Church? Because for me, coming into it, so I was confirmed at Easter in 2021. So,
wow, in the midst of it, yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. So in the midst of obviously COVID stuff, and also, so I don't know, I coming from a background that I realized more and more was very prejudiced against the Catholic Church, and growing up as a good American and just having that healthy sense of rebellion and skepticism of any authority that's trying to tell you what to do, as I started like looking into what is the Catholic Church, it was like all of the red flags were raised. It was just like, oh gosh, no, like you have to submit to this, and like you have to trust in this, and these people are all bad and wrong, so how can you do that? So I just remember when I was really seriously starting to look into it, because I was just very I was like a hard no. Like I would never be Catholic. I'm never gonna convert. I know that it's wrong. I know that it's not the right faith. And then it sort of transitioned out of that into like, okay, well, maybe I should just like look into it a little bit. And that was like the driving question. I was like, yeah, okay, but what is the Catholic Church? Like, what am I ultimately like signing on to? What do I ultimately have to believe? Like, where is the room for what's private devotion? I didn't even know like what is dogma, what is doctrine, like what is it really? And
All I know is they gave me a box of envelopes. Yeah.
right. Well, and having like so much already like resistance to it, it's been really interesting falling in love with the Catholic faith because it's very surprising. Like it's just such a radical like shift for me from being so like resistant and against it to falling in love with it. And I guess since being confirmed and since like practicing the faith, it's so much more all encompassing than I realized. Like it is so much more universal than I realized. There's so much more. Like it's just so much more that I found it easier to be like, well, it's hard to define like Catholicism or what the Catholic Church is. And it's been easier for me to be like, well, that's not it. Or like this thing is missing like what's essential to Catholicism. Like maybe it's the sacraments or maybe it's this, like depending, because I have all these, different relationships with people of varying Protestant denominations. And it's like, yeah, that's closer, but that's not it. Like that doesn't have this. So I guess I find it easier to get a handle on what the Catholic Church is based on like what it's not. Like
Michael, your word like poetic metaphysics, that might capture it, that this, as we're thinking through this, I guess I was thinking for me, Catholic, because I live in a rural town and our parish is 5 rural churches. And because I've worked for them and I know everybody in them, like my choice of where I go for Eucharist is pretty easy. It would be very different for me if Amy and I moved into a suburban church in Rochester. I need our listeners and people to hear that. It's just, right now the church is where these people we kind of consider brothers and sisters, receive the Eucharist, these people who we've celebrated life events with and so forth. But that's a almost a front porch republic type of angle on things, that some of the benefits of rootedness, something about Wilhelm and Sally is right now, certainly rootedness isn't their defining characteristic. But Michael, when you mention like poetic metaphysics, if we bring in like Owen Barfield or Steiner and so forth, we do need to be thinking, all of us, is again, what does it mean in the context of something like the evolution of consciousness? That we know the poetic, something can be one in many at the same time. To hold on that, to die on the Trinity Hill, that, we can see this ontology. My hero, Ivan Illich would say that the Beatitudes right now are becoming almost scientifically provable in our time. 2,000 years into the incarnation, you can say, yes, blessed are the poor. We just see the disease of affluenza, to use the cheesy term and so forth. But, I think it's shifting. I enjoyed hearing all of you. But if we can't give up that paradigm of a poetic metaphysics, it has to be, and that is Eucharist, right? Something is one and many at the same time, because the world falls apart without that. And I think it's the Christian, this Catholic thing. That's the genius. It's somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, this morning I was teaching a class on Shakespeare, and I was telling the students, I was trying to give them a sense of the cultural context of Shakespeare compared to our cultural context, right? Where everybody believed in angels and fairies, and they believed the cosmos was a real thing, and no one would question that. They believed in a kind of hierarchical structure of the universe. It was not, nobody would ever question that. But also that it was, especially if you go even before Shakespeare into the medieval period, if you think, or the Celtic Church, I mean, you think about the relationship, those churches on the frontier, the outskirts of the empire, they had such a loose relationship to the power structure that they were kind of doing their own thing, and they still felt like they were part of the church, right? But they were so far away from everything, it was able to sprout organically, you know, and really according to local conditions, right? And and that's something. I mean, to me, that's at the essence of a poetic metaphysics, is this ability to live in the moment in which you find yourself. And here's the thing. So what happened with Shakespeare's day is that's when pure nature became a popular philosophy amongst Catholics. It was a Catholic born idea that could there be any place in the created order that was void of God's grace or touch, right, or presence. And the pure nature theologians said, yes, there could be. We don't know if there is, but there could be. That kind of speculation, which is actually an outgrowth of debates that were earlier in the Middle Ages about the real presence of the Eucharist, which is where, you know, the dogmas about transubstantiation came in, because it was kind of a rational application to a theological problem, and they got more and more rational. Whereas in the Orthodox Church, they never talk about notions of transubstantiation. They just say it's the body of blood.
Well, Gakov kind of hazards the word
It's a mystery.
transmutation, but he might say, you know, transmutation, and that might get at it some way, you know, and that's better language.
But I think what you lose with that kind of rationality imposing onto religious experience is it begs the question of becoming more and more rules oriented, which are also rational applications of things, where and we see this through the history of the church, right? You have these two polarities. You have the theologians, right? So we have all the rule books. We know how we're supposed to do stuff. We have decided everything. But on the other side, you have the mystics. So this week, my family and I, when we were praying, we read a little bit of Julian of Norwich, the bit on the hazelnut, right? So the mystics and the poets come up with these insights that very often get them into, wait, that's heretical. You're not supposed to think that, right? And then we notice over time, very often, they end up being right. But the theologians were freaked out because, and I can't, you know, I'm an academic, so I can't help but compare it to the academic structure, which is, guess what? Original thought is not rewarded in academia. I'm here to tell you. Yeah. So because that's part of the club, right? You got a club. We're the academic club. Just like, you know, the Middle Ages, you had, you know, the University of Paris or whatever it happened to be, or Oxford. You know, we got the club, we got the rules, and here's this guy coming over here telling me it's different. Let's burn him, right? Or whatever they did. And actually, I think I gave it to one of my daughter's friends. I had a book of Marguerite Poreta's The Mirror of Simple Souls. And it was published in like 1911 or something. And I have a couple of versions. I have the Middle English version, and I have a more modern translation from Paulus Press. But what happened is when it came out in 1900 or whatever it was, they didn't know who wrote it. So it was published by the Catholic Church, I can't remember what publishing house, and it had an imprimatur on it. And then later they realized it was by Marguerite Poreta, and they're like, hold it! Wait, she's a heretic. We weren't supposed to do that. Sorry, mistake. So this is kind of an interesting phenomenon, and I see. Well, here's the thing: is I see in these traditional movements, like you guys being in tradition or the Ortho Bros, right, where there's a desire to kind of bridge both in a way. I mean, they got the rules oriented life, but also there is whether we're going to call it aesthetic experience or mystical experience. And I wouldn't call it mystical experience. I would call it devotional experience, maybe is a better way to put it. which you don't often get. I mean, I certainly got it as a kid in the North Zoko Church, but it's not conducive to that. Whereas these beautiful, I mean, even not just beautiful liturgy, but a beautiful church is kind of conducive to a to fostering a devotional disposition. And I'm sure you guys had that experience in Rome with all those gorgeous churches, right? Kind of begs the question to
Oh,
enter into
definitely.
Poetic metaphysics, right?
Oh, definitely. Oh, definitely. And it was so interesting to walk around Rome with Sally because she'd never been there before, and she was always amazed around every corner. Because sometimes you can get a bit blasé about it, but it is an amazing city. Um, but there, of course, I came there during the last years of John Paul II, and he had a mystical side to him that's not always lifted up too much. And also to your point there, I studied at the Dominican University there in Rome called the Angelicum.
Yeah.
And I asked, so this must be where you learn Thomism. And my professor said, what kind of Thomism? Because I think they could count, I think it was 30 different Thomisms in the 20th century. And of course, those that say they found tradition, so in America, that seems to be what they say. We've found tradition in the Latin Mass communities, but that's only one type of Thomism.
Right.
Which is very odd. There's 30 different types of Thomisms, and if you read Thomas, because many people don't even read him, he's not the Thomas that you might expect to meet. He had a professor that insisted that he was a spiritual master and a poet, and read him. He has a lot more facets to him. That diamond is a lot more beautiful than you think of it. It's not just some rough Thomistic piece of carbon. It's a very, very well polished diamond, and there's so many sides to him. And there was a wonderful Irish professor there, and he was a poet. And he's still there, I believe, at the Angelicum, and he would always stress that Thomas also was a poet and a singer. But yes, what type of Thomism? And I don't know why recently Ivan Illich is everywhere, but Sally and I discovered him in the last 2 years or so on. And he's very good at pointing out that a lot of the problems can be tied back to the Catholic Middle Ages, where it seems like the Catholic Church felt they could almost touch the perfect society on earth. And then as soon as they felt they could almost touch it, it started to fall apart. And talking about Rome again, I used to sit with my friends in front of the Pantheon. And that had an effect on my understanding of nature and grace, which of course the parody is that it's a two-tiered building where you have nature and then grace just on top. But it's far more like the Pantheon, where the light shines from the top into the bottom through the whole building.
Sally.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it's interesting, the whole, just like, again, being sort of a new convert, and I was confirmed in a very, I think, typical Novus Ordo Mass. I didn't have a confirmation name. I remember asking my RCIA instructor, like, so like, when do we get our confirmation names? And they're like, oh, you don't need to do that. And I was like, what? Okay.
We're not doing that.
I was like, and then I'm like in this deeply humiliated state of realizing like how like arrogant and proud I had been just like all the months leading through these courses, and I'm like, I can't be more Catholic than my RCIA instructor, so I guess I'll just go with that. So it's just really, and like the COVID stuff.
My
really,
RCIA instructor. It conjures up so many images. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. But and there were just so many things going on at that time, like with COVID and with like all the like the churches were shutting down and everything. And so it's just really like, for me, the Latin Mass was, I think, really instrumental in my conversion. I didn't have such a context for the reforms, Vatican II, any of this stuff at that moment, but it was like, I guess for me, like the fact that people were saying like, well, Latin is only spoken in the church, so therefore it's not so interesting, or it's not so relevant to people. That like sent off sort of this like light bulb in my head. I'm like, wow, okay, so there's something in this context where like only this remains only here. Like, is there anything else that remains only here, like the deposit of faith or the true church?
Okay.
So I know that like not all Catholic churches are in Latin, but it just, for me at that time, it was like, okay, so this is unique here. And so I really enjoyed going to, and also like, because I had the background with some of the Episcopal liturgy, it was a little bit in the Novus Ordo, it's even closer to like that Episcopal, and sometimes they're singing like the same Anglican type hymns. So it just, I think I needed a little bit more separation from the like liturgical background that I was familiar with to kind of really like, okay, shake things up for me. But then there's just like in the years following that, it's just been so many debates back and forth. And I do feel like we're always in these extremes. Like we're in like the Catholic worker thing here, and then we're like in the, you know, SSPX chapel over here. And there's just all these like, I guess, debates going on. But for me, I'm still sort of reeling from the fact that someone was drawing me into the Catholic faith, like in spite of all of these things. And so I do find it important, you know, but it's also like there's something stronger than any of this stuff, that like people are still going to convert in like the most heinous, you know, liturgy, like me or my sister, who also has been confirmed since then. It's like in spite of all of these things, and sometimes maybe they're an aid in some way, and it's too difficult for me to say this is all bad or this isn't doing any good here, because I came into it through some of those things that people would say, like the RCIA program's terrible. I'm like, it actually was kind of terrible, but I like, it's what I like went through and what
That's
I
why you believe in
guess.
purgatory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Maybe I'll spend a lot of time there. But yeah, so I guess
I
those are-
think, Michael, if you or for maybe Wilhelm and Sally, the only, I've been to different Marian shrines, but my strongest connection is to La Salette, 1846 or 1848, I think 1846. But at La Salette, Our Lady said, Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. These things, they're right in there. St. Paul, again, when we were talking about Ivan Illich, we're looking for something. And I think, what we're hearing, and not trying to summarize anything, and I want you guys to talk a little bit more about that, that we used to have fun when we were, back when we were Buddhists. Why are we so angry all the time? But what Michael's getting at with the poetic metaphysics and the literalization of everything, that's it. Beyond left and right, it's this literalization of everything. And the reverse,
left and right both do it, right?
Right. They do. And we need that so importantly. And we see the same type of like false divisions in politics. But because what we're seeing is the fewer and fewer people left in church, and certainly in the priesthood, are very literal minded, right? Whether they're chronically scrupulous or are drawn to that. And that's my experience in campus ministry for sure. I've said on this podcast, take 8 out of 10 young men who are probably interested in the RCIA, and you're going to see 8 out of 10 are probably suffer with severe OCD. Because we're putting out that image in a chaotic world, this disease of religion, I call, the one that Michael's at war with through a poetic metaphysics. If you take an anxious young person who skews a little bit more kind of left-brained, and you say there's this institution that tells you to say these Marian prayers on Monday, these on Wednesday, these on Friday, eat meat 11:59 on this day, but not 12 o'clock. There's a brain that if it's saddled with OCD, it's definitely like flies to shit, right? And so our numbers are hemorrhaging, but a greater percentage are of this kind of left brain Catholic, and of the left and the right, and then that's kind of that's changing the liturgy to be more and more left and right, Novus Ordo or Latin Mass, more and more kind of literal. But I think we need to get people to see that so clearly, that. I don't know. I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road for me.
I think, like, as I mentioned last time, I think this guy right here, Robert Herrick, my pastor.
He's your man. Yeah.
And the reason being is because he was an Anglican priest. He understood that it's supposed to be messy. That the structure it doesn't have a structure in a way. And that's what I would love. I mean, I'm sorry to sound pessimistic, but that's what's missing.
Yeah, or
right?
how about this way? Like if you say some people,
you can't just chill, right? You can't just, it's politics ruins everything, right?
Yeah.
but also, I mean, but the other part, and this is the thing, is if you're getting news feeds from, sorry, hate to rip on your old job, Wilhelm, but if you're getting news feeds from Rome every week or every day, we know what the Pope's thinking. We know what he had for breakfast or whatever, right? So we know what he had in his audience today. But if you go back to the Celtic Church and even before the Middle Ages, they had no idea what was going on, and they didn't care because they were living the faith. And so this weird thing, the centralization of faith by news feed, is destructive.
It's the promise of the internet, right? It was
It's
going to
destructive,
lead to
right?
wild
It's totally
diversity, but it's
destructive.
total uniformity now,
Yeah, it's destructive, and in a way it's the Catholic surveillance state. So how do you, and this is my question, I don't have the answer. Though I think the indication is, like, well, like the nouvelle théologie of theologians return to the sources, right? And the sources aren't, for them, they were theologians. The sources were the fathers for them. But I'm part of the peasantry. What are the sources for us, right? What are the sources for the faithful? And it's not, and it wasn't, it was never even the catechism. It was the practice, right? And I think, and if you know the history of those kinds of practices, they were more alive than what we are now. And this is why I think, I really love in the Byzantine Church and in the Roman Church, when you have it. I mean, they didn't do it for decades, but when I was a kid, I loved the Feast of St. Blaise when you had Bless Your Throat, right? That was so cool, right?
That's still in every Catholic church that I know.
Yeah,
but it's not big. You're right.
It's not a big deal, right? And
it's a daily mass thing that the 13 people at daily mass and 2
Yeah.
extras come to. Yeah.
But or Lammas, right? Which is a beautiful feast, which
That's
has
gone.
fallen into to invisibility. I mean, the loaf mass. I mean, come on. The harvest feast of the loaf mass, the first loaf baked of the year. I mean, you can't get any more Eucharistic than that, but it's atrophied. So, but now I don't know. I hate to suggest that going backwards is the way to go forward, right? And I think this is one of the things I learned from Rudolf Steiner. It's not, but we have to somehow, like, have one eye to the tradition. And the thing is, different people have different interpretations of what the tradition is, but the other eye to the future. And I don't mean innovation necessarily. I mean inspiration, right? That's and that's what I mean. I don't know how to resolve that, because there is a comfort that some people find in, I would say, retreating into tradition. And I see this I saw this years ago in Rod Dreher, right?
Yeah.
Where it's kind of all right, kids, get the guns and get in the basement. We're having Latin mass. You know what I mean? It gets kind of bunker, right? There's a bunker mentality. We're going to do homeschool, and you're suspicious, and you're just creating a neurotic society, right? How do we create something that's alive and joyful?
And this is the time to mention that Sally and Wilhelm have a wonderful boy. I'm not going to name him now in privacy. You guys can, but it was a pleasure to meet him, and they're expecting number 2. But so I mean, they have a huge investment in the future. What do you think, Sally? You were about to say something.
Well, I also, the whole idea of like some people are trying to go back in time or some people are trying to move forward. It's like you can't go back in time. So I guess I view it like everybody's actually in the current moment doing what they think is best in the current moment. So even people that are looking to the past or trying to retreat, it's like you can't really, like that can't be done. So everything is happening in real time. And so I think for me, like thinking about it that way makes it everything, every method that everybody's trying a little bit more interesting because there is no going back. So even people that are trying to bring things from the past into the present or into the future, that's very new, you know. And so I guess it makes me feel a little bit more open to what anybody has to say about any of this stuff. But also I think the problem is I think the best antidote is to not be afraid. Like, I know that that sounds kind of cliche, but like you're saying,
No, it doesn't. That's
how do
exactly
we
what I was saying.
find
It's great. It's great.
place of
Yeah.
joy? But it's like, I've seen this because being in between all these different things too, like I have a pretty, I'd say, American conservative sort of political family background. And it's like all about fear. It's all about like preparing for the worst. And it's like it's almost like your Christian duty. It's like a matter of prudence to like prepare for the end of time and so I think a lot of people are just doing the best they can. And these are obviously the biggest things. It's your faith and it's your family. It's like, you really don't want to mess up here. Like, are you really going to be failing your family if you don't do these things? Or are you going to, what side on Judgment Day are you going to be on if you take this position? And so,
Goats or sheep.
yeah, I just think exactly. And so I think in an understandable way, like people are afraid, but I've just found more and more, it's just like, I don't know, just like you have to like have hope and not be afraid. And then it's like you can think more poetically, more creatively. And I just, everything is pushing you into fear, whether it's fear of, any of this stuff.
Especially at our moment in history, right? I mean, it's
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. And I think that
Everything's
it's
fear.
all wrapped up in like you're saying, like this like constant like media influence. And also I think part of just touching back a little bit to like this like rational sort of legalistic way of thinking about things, or what you were saying, Michael Sauter, about, you know, these left brain people that like having this checklist of things to do, or being able to like have all your boxes checked and be able to be right about everything. It's like we also live, everything's recorded. Like, even if you know that you're not being recorded, it's like somebody else is being recorded, and like you can't ever erase things, and things are always there. And so people, I think, are very muzzled and afraid to speak unless they're sure that they've like thought it completely through, and anything that anyone could say, they could back it up, and they fact checked it here, here, and here. So I think that that's part of the reason, like, yeah, it's technology, and it's part of the reason why people are so relieved to have a checklist. Like, I don't know if it's more than that. I think it's just,
That's a good point. Yeah.
you can't really say anything. And if you say, I don't know, they're like, yeah, gotcha. It's like, that's so the environment that we're in. It's like, unless you can like 100% back it up. So you don't really have the space to say, well, I think this today, it might change tomorrow. Then you don't really have like a right to speak your opinion like these days. And, or no one's gonna,
where's your data?
yeah, exactly. Where's your data? And I personally, like, that's something that I've been very like liberated from in becoming a Catholic, because I didn't realize growing up sort of evangelical Protestant, it's like you have this like assurance of faith, you have this like freedom in Christ, but it's really like, okay, how many people are you going to be able to like convince to convert? Like, how watertight are your arguments? And really, like, if you were to have some sort of theological debate,
That's right.
you win when the other person doesn't have anything else to say. You don't win
Onward,
when
Christian
it's
soldier.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I realized more and more as I was coming into the Catholic faith, which is like, you know, the prism, and the light hits it and it goes in a million different ways.
Here comes everything. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I just realized, like, I think that I don't think it's like directly, like you can directly say this, but in a way it's like a very like Protestant American legalistic mentality. So it is really interesting to hear like Catholics talk about the legalism in the Catholic Church, or this like rationalism, because from what I'm coming from, it's like such a liberation from that. But I also do see, like, you know, the situation that we're in today, and there's like so much more to learn about the history of the church and everything. But I don't know, it's like a breath of fresh air in the opposite direction for me. So
It's like vanishing so fast though, Sally. I mean, yeah,
yeah,
but
I'm
it's like,
sure.
it's a full scale war on it, you know. Wilhelm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want
Yeah. No,
to
I meet people. Sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, people, Americans are always willing to talk about religion, unlike Europeans. And you're always talking about Christianity, and people really want that checklist. And no matter what their various Christian tradition is. And when you've lived the Christian life for a while, you realize it's okay. You're always a heretic in somebody's eyes, always.
Exactly.
You don't have to have all the steps. You just need the next step. And people really want all those checklists. And it's getting harder and harder because we're getting more and more mechanized in everything we do. Machines can take more and more of our jobs. And I think the scary thing, if you're a creative literary person, we thought that they couldn't touch the literature. They couldn't touch it, but now you have, I think it's called Chat GPT,
Yep.
and you can a computer can write a book for you.
In a minute.
So where do you go? Where do you go? Where is this poetic metaphysics? And it always seemed to me that in poetry there is that anarchistic aspect. There's no rules, and I don't know if that can be mechanized, but it seems to me that that is the only place to go, and it seems that is fundamentally the most Christian position as well, to go there.
Yep.
So I think that's a very scary thing, because everything can be a checklist, even our literature, even our books. And all the Christians are like that too. They want that checklist, and they want to have all their bases covered. But as I say, look, you're going to be a heretic in somebody's eyes, and that's okay. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. But
that's well said.
Yeah.
That's why I've been pushing poetry on my YouTube channel lately, for precisely because people don't know how dead things are. And by the way, and speaking of Chat GPT and poetry, here's a kind of a funny anecdote. A few days ago, this guy I know, I think I know him on Facebook and on Twitter. He's from Scotland, and I was posted something about Chat GPT, and so he went to Chat GPT and asked it to write a poem about me.
Oh wow.
It's so bad, but part of it, they captured part of the first stanza. I mean, it would sound like someone was describing me for sure, but it's such horrible poetry. I'm sure they're going to try to improve that. But on that topic, do you guys know this book?
It is great.
The Catholic.
I've heard of her.
We were reading it at the same time, Michael, when we first met. I
Yeah.
don't know if you recall, but several times, Michael and I, we barely knew each other. There'd be some correspondence, but we would be finding that we were reading like the Endless Trace. We were reading at the same time.
Yeah.
And the Catholic thing, we just realized books we had never discussed, we were reading at the same time.
And it's great. I mean, I'm just going to read you this beautiful couple sentences.
Rosemary Rosemary Hutton.
Rosemary Hutton. The lost Celtic Catholicism was uniquely important in its embracing quality, its feeling for the presence of the divine and natural beauty and on the unexpected, its single-minded devotion to the quest for God, and its sheer wealth of symbol and fantasy, which captured
so much. Yeah.
And she in this book, her two main metaphors are the Lady of the Church and the Lady Sophia, who Sophia kind of gets the the church structure to loosen up once in a while. You got to chill. You know what I'm saying? Just got to chill out a little bit. But here's this other sentence where she's kind of developing from this Celtic church idea. She says, but Catholicism died out of Wales for the Methodist chapel culture. Splendid as it was in many ways, distrusted its predecessor and all works of the fairies and the old heroes. And I don't know if you guys see this in your trad communities, but I have noticed in quite a few trad communities that I'm familiar with, that they've also resurrected the belief in fairies.
Good.
Because you see, you see it in, what's his name? David Russell Mosley, if you know him, right? He's all, but you also see it in David Bentley Hart, and you see it in John Milbank.
I'm going to ask the next fairy I see and see if he's in tradition.
When
I'm out with the bees, yeah, I'm going to say, fairy, you're kind of bothering me. I'm just taking care of the bees. Are you in tradition? But one thing I think where we have, I don't know, it just came to me when we were talking about with an eye on the future, Sally, when you were talking about that. But it was, and I'm thinking of our friend Novalis. And my understanding of the Catholic tradition is that the canon is not totally and formally closed, right? And that's such a powerful image, because you take the scrupulous types, and I'd have to get my wording on that right, but Novalis was talking towards the end of his life, reminding people the canon's not closed, and what if we put Hymns to the Night in the canon or something?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but that's a real threat to people. Now I do. I'm not trying to pick a fight with people, and I could have some of this wrong, but I was told by my priest growing up, who then became Bishop of Syracuse, I believe, that we've never formally said, boom, that with a council you could say, wow, we've received. It has to be judge fitting and pointing to Christ, but somebody could say, wow, this seems to get it.
Well, you know what?
At
Speaking
least
of
that
Novalis,
openness makes me feel like I can breathe.
Right.
speaking of Novalis, Mike.
Yeah.
My publisher I wrote about him recently in my Substack, and my publisher read it and he said, "Okay, I'm going to go ahead," because he told me like a year or two ago that he wanted to republish Novalis's essay,
Christendom in Europe.
Christianity or Europe.
Yeah, it's great.
It goes by both titles. And he wants me to write a long essay because it's a short book.
Oh,
So
I
he
hope
has me
they
to write
do. I hope they do.
But in that he uses the medieval Catholic culture as a model to, as an inspiration. Let's put it as inspiration for moving forward. And unfortunately, the European Union kind of did a bastardized version of this by forming the European Union, where it's not Christendom, it's secularism. Pretending to be. It's not a Christian culture. It's
Our friend John Milbank loves the EU.
I don't know why. I don't know why.
What do you think, Wilhelm?
Yeah,
Wilhelm is
well-
the son of Swedish diplomats.
Yes. 4 generations of diplomats. We have a saying in our family: the state giveth and the state taketh away.
Yeah.
But you walk around Brussels, and if you've been there, they have little plaques in all the EU buildings where they take their inspiration for the European project, and all of them tie back to Charlemagne. And then there's, if only, and then other people say that the EU flag is actually the crown around Mary's head. So
Yeah.
actually, when Sweden was about to join the EU in the beginning of the 90s, and the same thing was in Norway, it was actually an argument that the EU was a Catholic conspiracy to recreate the Catholic Empire of Charlemagne. That was actually an argument.
Isn't the national
believe it
anthem
or
like
not.
Ode to Joy? That's a good sign too, right? Isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Well,
Yes.
yeah. Schiller.
Yeah. Yeah. If only. I mean, if that's a conspiracy, it's the worst conspiracy ever. That wasn't really didn't really happen. But that is, yeah. So I haven't read that text of Novalis, but Christendom or Europe, just the title is intriguing, because of course the popes very much wanted to put those two together, but they've been ripped apart and said no, it's not the same thing at all.
We'll have to do an episode on Walter Browser sometime, right, Michael?
Okay.
Have you read deeply into him? The feral child. He's very tied into like good stories about him, and there's an anthroposophist, Terry Boardman, who's brilliant, who writes on him. But it's as if Novalis's vision was going to be there. Then it's an abduction and everything. There's a German version of the story of Caspar Hauser.
Yeah, the anthropops get weird about that, man.
Yeah, but it's really fascinating if you ask me. I want to do an episode on it. But the Werner Herzog did a movie on it, which means it's pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, he did. I had never seen it.
Yeah, and then there's a German one which tells the story, because you have Friedrich Dahmer, who is it has to do with British politics. It's genius, and that just came up because the story of kind of what happened to Europe runs through this feral child. It's some of the best alternative history I've ever read. But so Wilhelm, we're going to be winding up here a little bit. Wilhelm and Sally, tell us your hopes for the future. So you have a young son, another child on the way. They're in transit right now. Again, I began by talking about 2 sparrows in a hurricane trying to find their way. Young, very intelligent Catholics, can't thank you so much or enough for being here. As Paul says, what reason do you give for your hope?
Well, just here in Florida, just yesterday, we're down in St. Augustine to visit Our Lady of La Leche down there, Our Lady of the Milk, which is a Catholic Marian shrine down there, the oldest one in America. And it's wonderful. It's such an astonishing image of Jesus at the breast of Mary. And one thing that was so important for Sally's conversion and our life forward as Catholics, and
have you read Bonaventure's nativity story, where Mary squirts breast milk all over the baby Jesus to wash him and everything?
All right.
Yes, it's online.
And yes, and I think that is very hopeful for us, and also being Catholics in America, thinking of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the patron saint of all the Americas, and Our Lady of La Leche, and of course, Sunday is the Lord's Day, but every Saturday is Our Lady's Day. And to think of going forward, the importance of Saturdays as a link to Our Lady, and you have the Marian
Wow.
aspect there, and the feminine aspect, and the role of the Rosary, and the mysteries of it, and going forward with that is something that really binds us together and going forward. And that is what gives us hope. There's so much there, of course, but that Marian aspect of Catholicism in America, especially, and in our own lives, is what has become so important.
We're in
the
the
aspect
seventh year. We're in the second year of a novena leading up to the 500th anniversary of Our Lady of Guadalupe. You know, the world needs to know that. You know, we've got 7 more years. Wilhelm, that was quite brilliant. That was worth the price of admission. Sally.
Yeah, well, thank you for having us on, and also just chatting with you is always very interesting. Yeah, I would just say everything that Wilhelm just said. A big source of hope for me too is like this unexpected conversion still is like just still pushing me forward. It's like, wow, I'm just not afraid. It's just I know that like what any of us need, like what we need to see, what we need to know, what we need to learn, like is there and will be there, and to just trust that God is trying harder than any of us individuals to make sure that we get the right information or the right, devotional spirit. So I just really trust that, and definitely the Blessed Virgin Mary and all of the ways that she's shown herself to us, and motherhood has really connected me to that, obviously.
Have you back on again. We have Sally on motherhood and the image of birth. Is its whole thing, Michael.
There's so much there,
it's a
because
whole
that is
world,
very hopeful. Yeah, that's very hopeful for me.
birth. But
Yeah.
I mean, that was wow, what a great ending. Those were and Wilhelm, this notion, I was thinking of canonicity earlier, which I haven't thought of in about 3 years. But the notion, that I always think is we need to build the new in the shell of the old. But the idea of like people gathering on a Saturday and that being like an upwelling spring that can kind of infiltrate and kind of make all things new from the inside is one of the more hopeful things I've kind of heard. If people are really
Isn't that
struggling
such
with
an
their,
image of Jesus in the womb,
it
making
is.
all things new from the inside?
It is. Sally hitting it out of the park on birth.
Yeah.
Can't thank you guys enough. We'll do this again. I learned so much, and we want to thank everybody. Michael Martin, talk about Substack and Patreon.
But first I have to say, when's the baby due?
About a month, early October.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Looking forward to that. Yes. So yeah, Patreon right there. That's our Regeneration coffee cup. We're pro-capitalism once in a while, people. So go check out our Patreon.
I'll link it to
my,
the YouTube version. Yeah.
I'm on a tear about Christian romanticism recently. On my Substack on the Druid Stairs Back. So not only there, but here on in the comments here, both on the podcast version, on the YouTube version, please comment, mention, talk about things you'd like to see us bring up on the show. And the more comments, I don't know about you, Mike, I think the more comments the better for me. I get jazzed by the comments and by the interaction with
yeah.
Okay.
Isn't it funny? Like the cheesiest thing you can say, like a year plus into this podcast, is you'd hear it on the news. It rises from the heart, and I know Michael feels this the best way. Again, meeting Sally and Wilhelm, like, oh my God, we have the world's best listeners, right? Just overawed. To think that like you guys could come visit, we could have a day like we had and everything. So the comments are always great. And everybody, thanks for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. We will see you here.